My parents took me to court because I wouldn't give my brother my new truck. They lost the case and had to pay my legal bills. When my cameras saw my brother cutting my tires in retribution, I called the police and let them show him what deserve really means. Hey, Reddit. My parents always treated my brother like a king and me like a slave. So I said, forget it. I made my own life and finally acquired something that was mine. They weren't ready to give that up, it turns out. Here's how it all started before everything went wrong. Tyler Hayes is my name. I'm in my early 30s and work as a mechanic for heavy equipment and cranes. I work on job sites in the middle of nowhere most of the time, running machinery that weigh more than houses and working shifts that are so long that I forget what day it is. Mark and Lisa Hayes, my younger brother Blake, and I are all back in Tulsa. Blake is my favorite. It's easy to understand how it works. I do the labor, and Blake gets paid. They never stated it out loud, but they didn't need to. After years of living out of bags, eating whatever I could heat up on a steel counter, and saving practically every check I got, I finally did something nice for myself. I bought the truck I had been planning for longer than I had ever planned anything in my personal life. A dark blue 2022 Chevy Silverado RST with clean lines and everything just way I wanted it. I made it all by myself. I stepped into the dealership, signed the papers, and drove it away. It felt like I had finally crossed a line I had been trying to cross since I was 18. I still had my old beater car, largely for work days and weeks when I didn't want anything to touch the Silverado. It made a lot of noise, smelled like dust, spilled coffee, and only worked when it wanted to. But it always began. I was going to use the truck. The beater was for everything else. When I finally had a few days off, I drove the Silverado to Tulsa. I rent a little duplex on the south side of Tulsa. It's close enough to my parents' house that I can stop by, but far enough away that I can breathe. I pulled into my folks' driveway in the late afternoon. The paint glowed dark blue because the sun hit it just perfectly. Blake unlocked the front door and got out of the truck before I even turned it off. He looked like he had just gotten out of bed at noon. A hoodie, slides, and unkempt hair. He didn't blink as his gaze went directly to the truck. He responded, "Oh, damn," and walked toward it with the look that means he wants something. "So, when are you going to let me take it out?" There it was. Not praise, not thanks. He still talks like he owns everything, just like he did when he discovered how to beg for goods without working for them. He walked around the truck like he was in charge of an inspection. I leaned against the door and spoke in a flat, dry voice. "Yes, just after I give you my PIN number." He chuckled as if I were kidding. I wasn't. I made sure that the enthusiasm in my voice was clear and left no room for doubt. He kept moving in circles, looking at every aspect like he was planning modifications for something that wasn't his. He reached for the handle. Before he touched the lock, I hit it with the remote. He said, "Relax," seeming annoyed. I was only going to look inside. "You can see it from right where you are." He blinked and looked perplexed for a second, as if his brain couldn't figure out what a limit was. He always thought my things were only temporary storage until he was ready to take them. The Silverado wasn't going to be one of those things. Mom stepped out onto the porch with a big smile on her face and did her regular cheerleading dance for Blake. Dad came out after her, hands on his hips, and looked at the truck from the stairs. Blake stared back at them, hoping to receive some support for his big brother shares everything charade. Dad remarked it looked costly. Not impressed. Making a decision. I said, "Looks earned." Blake shrugged as if he were the one who let the purchase happen. "Yes, it's fine. You know, I would look nice in it too. I told you that you would never find out." That took the smile off his face for half a second. Then he went back to the fake chuckle mode. The one where he acts like he's not worried so he can come back later and try again. Blake doesn't throw things away. He puts them away. Mom came down the stairs and hugged me. She talked too fast about how busy they had been and how Blake was only teasing. Dad kept looking at the truck like he was trying to figure out how beneficial it would be for someone else. I recognized the look. Every year I came home with new work boots or tools. I saw it. Anything I had worked for myself. The look on his face said, "How long until this is yours?" Blake walked up next to me again. Seriously, you have to let me drive it at least once, like a christening or something. I gave him a half smile. Yes, the day you pay one of my bills. He didn't like that answer. He didn't say anything back either, which made me think he was saving the moment for later. As the sun went down and they kept attempting to make jokes to get into the truck, the familiar pressure came back. The same pressure I usually felt when I walked through this door. The idea that I would fold like they instructed me to. The same old weight that would get tighter as soon as Blake desired something. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. But I knew that this visit wouldn't stay quiet for long. We didn't have any written rules in the house where I grew up, but everyone knew them. My dad, Mark Hayes, used to be an Army NCO and thought that yelling fixed everything. He'd yell instructions in the kitchen like he was in charge of a parade. It didn't matter if it was your grades, your duties, or how you breathed. He turned things that bothered him into lessons. Mom Lisa didn't shout. She used disappointment as a weapon. She could make it seem like you were to blame for anything, even if you weren't there when it happened. She would say things like, "Do you want to see your father upset?" Or, "Blake looks up to you." She said it in a quiet manner that made you feel like you were failing some invisible test. The method was foolproof because of the two of them. I started working early because no one ever advised me not to. I was cutting lawns in the neighborhood by the time I was 10. By the time I was 13, I had a paper route that I did before school. I was 16 years old and working in a warehouse after school, stacking pallets while other students were stacking college brochures. Nobody was surprised by any of that. I worked all the time. Dad told me I should do more, if anything. Blake, on the other hand, didn't have to do anything. Mom blamed the teacher if he missed his assignment. If he broke something, Dad said it was because he was a kid. If he lied, they said it was because he was creative. And when he messed up big time, which was often, they blamed anything they could find. The weather, his mood, his buddies, and me. He crashed a go-kart in the garden once because he thought it would be fun to drift on wet grass. Mom took him out for ice cream to calm him down instead of punishing him. The next weekend, I used tools I bought myself to replace the fence boards and straighten out the go-kart frame. Blake told people he fixed it as he moved around. He also took a bike from a neighbor kid, painted it, and rode it like it was his. Dad wrote a check without glancing at me when the neighbor came to the door. He said it was a mistake. Even though Blake tried to accuse me in front of them, Dad didn't blink. Blake was the one who didn't do anything wrong. I was the older person. Automatic bad guy. School was the same. Dad asked me why it wasn't an A+ when I returned home with an A. They put a C- on the fridge for Blake like he had won a scholarship. Mom would look at me like I was meant to clap and say things like, "Blake tries so hard." When I was 17 and bought my first set of tools, Dad said, "Good. Now you can fix Blake's stuff, too." It wasn't a joke. It was a real expectation. My work was family property, and Blake counted his family twice. By the time I graduated high school, I knew exactly how the roles worked. I left for work locations because if I stayed home, I would have to spend my life holding up someone who wasn't even trying to stand. Blake stayed since he didn't have to do anything to keep alive. They kept him safe, comfortable, and applauded him for being there. I never felt jealous, not even once. I just didn't get why you would raise someone who never had to work for anything. Eventually, I found out the truth that made sense of everything. They didn't have two sons. They took care of one prince, Blake, and one pack mule, me. My job wasn't to do well. It was to make Blake feel good while he went through life without being touched. They never said that. They didn't have to. It was clear in every chore list, every reprimand, every Tyler, help your brother, and every Blake didn't mean it. So, it wasn't unexpected that Blake stared at my new truck like it had his name written in the paint. That was the same thing happening over and over again. The difference now was clear. I wasn't 17 anymore, and I wasn't going to play the part one was given again. 2 days into my visit, Mom emailed me to say she wanted a private family meal to catch up. No plans, no hints, just a regular supper, or so they say. I knew better, yet I went regardless. I just wanted to see how long it would take for the real reason to come out. When I got there, their house appeared exactly the same. The yard was still sparse, and the porch light was still flickering like it had been dying for years. I parked the Silverado on the street instead of in the driveway. There's no sense to give Blake another excuse to circle it like a stray cat. Blake was already at the table when I stepped in, wearing a sweatshirt and holding his phone, acting like he hadn't been watching the window for me to arrive. He looked up with the half-hurt, half-smug look that he had perfected since he was a child. "Hey," he murmured, his voice quiet and weak, as if he was still healing from an injury I had caused. Mom came up next to him with plates and a big smile. "Thank God you made it, honey. It's been too long." Dad stood behind her with his arms crossed and looked me over instead of saying hello. I'd believe he was getting ready to give commands if I didn't know better. Blake didn't say anything, letting the drama build. We all took a seat. The small conversation lasted around 30 seconds. They didn't care what I'd been doing or where I'd been sent to work. They never did. They wanted to make their point. Mark didn't spend any time. He said this while leaning back like a judge preparing to give a sentence. "Your sibling has been having trouble getting around. His car has been acting strange. You already know that." I looked at Blake. He let out a short, practiced sigh. Shoulders drooped. "The mode for the wounded prince is now on." Dad continued, "You're doing well out there. Good money, good hours, you can manage." Mom's breath hitched like she was warming up her crying routine. She didn't wait for my answer. She went straight into the tears. "Blake just needs something reliable, Tyler. He's had such a hard year. You know how sensitive he is." Blake kept his head down, hands folded like he was praying. Perfect performance. Then Mark said it clean and direct, like he was stating something obvious instead of demanding something insane. "So, we think it's reasonable that you let him take the truck. No build-up, no asking, just the decree." I didn't blink. "No." Mom gasped like I'd slapped the table. Blake's head jerked up. Dad stiffened. I set my fork down. "I paid for it. I'm keeping it. Simple. Final." Mom wiped her eyes. "Honey, please. We're talking about family. Blake needs a leg up." Blake nodded, adding a whisper soft. "It's not forever. Just until I get things sorted." I shook my head. "No, that truck is mine." Dad's face tightened. He swapped to the voice he used when he thought respect was automatic. "Don't be selfish, Tyler. Your brother needs help. You don't need that thing right now. Not like he does. There's a difference between needing transportation," I said, "and needing someone else's property." Mom sniffed harder. Blake shifted in his seat like he was trying to look as fragile as possible. Dad leaned in, voice low but sharp. "You think you're above this family now? You think because you have a paycheck, you get to talk down to us?" I looked him dead in the eye. "No, but I'm not handing over a truck I earned because you two can't say no to Blake." Dad's jaw clenched. "He's your brother, right? Tyler, please, for once, do the right thing." "There's nothing right about giving him my truck," I said. End of story. Dad tried one more angle. His usual father authority tone. "Watch how you speak in this house. You're forgetting your place." I gave him a small, cold smirk. "My place is behind my own steering wheel." Blake's face twisted. He wasn't used to me shutting things down without a negotiation. He muttered, "You always think you're better than me." "No," I said. "I think I work harder than you." Big difference. Dad pushed back from the table, tapping his fingers like he was deciding whether to yell or lecture. Mom was already breathing in hiccups. Blake whispered something about not being supported. Mom repeated it louder, framing it like evidence. I stood up. "Dinner's over for me." Mom grabbed her napkin like she was preparing for a funeral. Dad tried one last shot. "You're going to regret this attitude." I walked toward the door. "I regret driving over here." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. When I got back to my duplex on the south side of Tulsa, the first thing I did was pull into the driveway, shut the truck off, and pull out the boxes I'd ordered a while back. Driveway and door cameras I'd been meaning to install but never bothered with. That night, I mounted them both. Quick, precise, no hesitation. I didn't do it out of fear. I did it because I knew the pattern. When Blake didn't get what he wanted, he didn't let it go, and neither did my parents. 2 days after the dinner, I got a text from my cousin Riley asking if I was coming to Grandma's birthday dinner at Auntie's place. Riley wasn't the type to stir anything, so I took it at face value. Nobody from my immediate family had mentioned it, but that wasn't unusual. They usually delivered information selectively. I showed up right on time. The driveway was full. Cars lined along the curb, porch lights on, voices inside. Looked like a real gathering. I grabbed a store-bought pie from the passenger seat and headed in. The second I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The living room wasn't set up for a birthday. No cake, no decorations, no presents, just chairs arranged in a wide circle. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone sitting stiff, eyes already on me. Grandma wasn't there. Aunt Denise cleared her throat. Your grandma wasn't feeling up to coming tonight. Sure she wasn't. Then I saw Mark and Lisa standing near the back wall like hosts of a talk show, and Blake slumped in a chair off to the side, hands clasped dramatically, looking like he'd been injured in some tragic event. It wasn't a birthday dinner. It was an ambush. I scanned the room once. Every seat filled, everyone watching. The setup was obvious, an intervention, except nobody in the room could define what I'd supposedly done wrong. My parents must have told them something dramatic enough to get them all here, though. Mom stepped forward, voice soft and trembling. Tyler, we're just here to talk as a family. Dad followed with a stern nod, like this was court, and he was the judge. Everyone is concerned about the situation. I looked at Blake, who was staring at the floor like the star of a made-for-TV tragedy. He didn't even look up to sell it harder. That was new. Usually, he loved the attention. I took a slow breath. All right, I said. Let's hear it. Aunt Denise started, rehearsed tone and all. We think your parents are just trying to support both of you. They're worried you're being unnecessarily harsh. Uncle Pat chimed in. Your brother is going through a tough time. He needs stability. A cousin added, he just wants a fair shot. Every person spoke like they'd practiced the lines. Same phrases, same tone, same direction. Blame me. Excuse Blake. Mark finally took center position. Your brother needs reliable transportation to get his life on track. You're financially secure. You can afford to share. Mom nodded, fighting tears. We thought you'd understand if you heard it from family, not just us. Blake finally looked up, adding a quiet and perfectly pitched, I'm not trying to take advantage, Ty. I just need help. He said it like I was the unreasonable one. Like the truck magically belonged to him, unless I defended it. I scanned the room again, faces full of expectation. They were waiting for me to fold in front of an audience. That was the whole point. Pressure from every direction. Instead, I straightened up and said loud enough for every person to hear, if you're all here to beg for my truck, line up behind Blake. The answer is still no. Silence. A couple relatives looked away fast, like they just realized how ridiculous the setup was. Riley hid a laugh behind their hand. Uncle Pat muttered something into his shirt collar. Mom's face crumpled. Dad's posture stiffened. Blake actually flinched. A little twitch. He tried to hide. I kept going. You dragged half the family here to guilt me into giving away something I bought. If you want to help Blake, go for it. Buy him a bus pass, a bike, another car. But my truck isn't on the table. Aunt Denise tried to salvage it. We're just trying to keep peace. Then stop staging interventions for a grown man who refuses to work, I said. That pushed a few people over the edge. My Uncle Ray stood up, clearing his throat. Well, maybe this wasn't the best idea. Cousin Malene followed. Yeah, I didn't know it was about taking your truck. That wasn't how your mom explained it. A couple others nodded, murmuring. Mom tried to reel them back in. He's twisting it. I cut her off. No twisting. You lied to get me here. You used Grandma as an excuse. I looked around the room again. And you wasted everyone's time. Dad's jaw clenched so hard the muscle twitched along the side. We're talking about family responsibility. I stepped toward the doorway. Responsibility doesn't mean surrendering my property because Blake can't handle being an adult. That was it. Nobody tried another speech. Nobody blocked the exit. I walked out, got in the beater sedan I'd driven there, and left the house without looking back. An hour later, while I was back at my duplex, Riley texted me. Just so you know, your parents planned that whole thing with Blake. They had talking points written out. A second message came right after. Most of us didn't know what it was really about. They said you were acting unstable. Total lie. I thanked them and set my phone down. The ambush hadn't convinced me to hand over anything. It just confirmed exactly what I already knew. If Blake wanted something, they said I was withholding property promised to my younger brother. Nothing subtle, nothing grounded in reality, just a rewritten version of events where I existed purely as Blake's storage unit. I skimmed the pages, flipped to the signatures, and saw both Mark and Lisa had signed like this was some noble act of duty. Blake's name wasn't on anything. He wasn't dumb enough to put his own signature on a lie. He let them do the heavy lifting while he hid behind his usual victim routine. I didn't bother with shock. I didn't bother with anger. They'd tried guilt. They tried an ambush. And now they were trying a legal attack. They were just leveling up the same demand. I called Carter Ningguan, a lawyer one of my co-workers swore by. Guy was mid-30s, sharp voice, sharper eyes. After hearing the story, his first sentence was, "They're out of their minds, but paperwork makes idiots bold. Send me everything." So I did. Carter filed a response, and discovery began. The back and forth heated up over the next few weeks. That's when things got fun. My parents had no proof of anything. No text, no email, no message showing any agreement whatsoever because there wasn't one. Their entire case was based on understood expectations, which isn't a legal argument, it's a family excuse. Carter told me, they're fishing for something that doesn't exist. Let them waste their energy. Meanwhile, the cousin leak kicked in. Riley sent me a folder of screenshots from the group chat my parents and Blake had used to orchestrate the ambush. They drafted talking points, listed which relatives should say what, and even practiced sympathy lines for Blake. The messages were time-stamped, clear, and embarrassing. Then Riley forwarded the messages Blake had sent privately to a couple cousins. "I'm calling dibs on Tyler's truck. He'll fold. Mom and Dad are going to make him do the right thing. He's got money. He doesn't need it. Hard evidence of entitlement. Hard evidence of planning. Hard evidence that the lawsuit wasn't about fairness. It was about Blake deciding he deserved something." Carter added it to the discovery packet with a smile that said, "This is over already." A few weeks later, after scheduling and document exchange, the deposition started. Blake went first. He arrived dressed like he was auditioning for a commercial about hardship. Oversized sweater, messy hair, dark circles he probably drew on himself. He sat down, sighed dramatically, and started every answer with, "I'm trying my best." Or, "This has been so hard on me." When Carter asked him what evidence he had of the so-called family understanding, Blake blinked hard like he was queuing up tears. "It wasn't written," he whispered. "It was emotional. We all just knew." Carter didn't say anything. "So, you don't have any proof?" Blake let a tear fall. "Tyler has always been the strong one, and I'm the sensitive one. Mom and Dad said they would make things fair for me. He knows that." I sat across the table watching the performance like a bad play. The tears slid down, but none hit his shirt. Hit. His breathing was offbeat, fake, practiced, predictable. Carter slid a printed screenshot across the table. "Is this your message?" Blake glanced. The words were clear. "I'm calling dibs on Tyler's truck." Blake paused and muttered, "That was a joke." "Understood," Carter answered. "And this one?" He slid the next. "Mom and Dad are going to make him do the right thing." Blake wiped a tear that didn't exist. Context matters. Carter didn't let him finish. And this he'll fold. Even the court reporter stopped typing for half a second. Blake's act cracked. The tears stopped. His jaw tightened. That was the real Blake. Entitled and cornered. Next came my parents' depositions. Mark tried authority first, talking like he was giving a motivational speech. He claimed family principles, unwritten rules, and Tyler's obligation as the older son. Carter let him talk until he ran out of breath, then asked, "Do you have any written evidence of this alleged agreement?" Mark tensed. "It wasn't written. It was understood." Carter nodded slowly. "Understood by whom?" Mark's silence answered perfectly. Mom tried tears and guilt. She insisted Blake needed a fresh start and that the truck represented balance in the family. She kept looking at me like I was betraying them by sitting still. Carter asked one simple question. "Did you or your husband ever give Tyler any money, loans, or promises regarding this truck?" "No," she whispered. "And did Tyler ever tell you he planned to give the truck to Blake?" "No," she whispered again. By the time my deposition came, their case had already collapsed. I answered Carter's questions plainly. When I bought the truck, how I paid for it, why I kept a second car, and what my parents had demanded. No theatrics, no emotion, no speeches, just facts. When it wrapped, Carter gathered the folders, looked at me, and said, "They have nothing, and now we have everything." He was right. Their lawsuit wasn't a legal case. It was a tantrum with paperwork, and it wasn't going to save Blake from the one thing he'd never faced in his life, consequences. A few weeks after the depositions, the courthouse was packed tighter than it needed to be. Mark and Lisa sat on one side, stiff-backed and polished, like they were posing for a church directory photo. Blake sat between them in the same helpless posture he'd used at the ambush. Shoulders slumped, hands folded, lips pressed in a permanent pout. He looked like a kid waiting for a lollipop, not a grown man in front of a judge. I sat with Carter and Gwen, calm, ready, and bored. When the case was called, Blake launched straight into the performance. He talked about his hard year, his mental strain, his need for stability, and how the truck represented family support. He dropped lines he'd rehearsed, complete with slow pauses like he wanted the courtroom to admire the emotional spacing. My parents backed him up with wide eyes and innocent tones. Lisa dabbed her eyelids every few minutes, the tears barely there. Mark tried to play the reasonable father, talking about family expectations and promises understood between brothers. He didn't look at me once, not even when he explained my duty as the older son. Carter took his turn and dismantled the whole thing piece by piece. No agreement, no documentation, no messages showing any plan to give Blake a truck. Then he presented the screenshots, the group chat planning the ambush, the dib statements, the guilt manipulation strategy. The judge read each page slowly like he was waiting for someone to give him a reason not to laugh. Blake tried to interrupt twice. Both times, the judge shut him down. When it was over, the judge leaned back and let the silence stretch. Then he delivered the ruling in clean, sharp sentences. Case dismissed with prejudice. Plaintiffs cover my cost and attorney's fees. No evidence of any agreement. Blake's face collapsed. Lisa gasped. Mark's jaw twitched like he was chewing nails. I thanked the judge, shook Carter's hand, and walked. He came across the driveway with the straight-line march he used to use when he was about to bark orders. No hello, no build-up. He stopped 3 feet away, eyes locked on the keys in my hand. "You think this is over?" he asked, voice low and shaking. That judge didn't fix anything. I didn't answer. I didn't move. He stepped closer, reaching for my pocket like he could just take the keys the way a parent snatches a toy from a toddler. His fingers brushed the edge of my jeans. I caught his wrist before he could close his hand. "Try that again and you will not like what you keep." And his eyes flicked up, confused for half a second. Then he pulled his hand back fast like he'd touched a live wire. He stared at me, the realization settling in. Whatever version of me he thought he could intimidate didn't exist anymore. Lisa called his name from the street, voice shaky, but trying to sound outraged. Blake was in the passenger seat of their car, watching from behind the window like a kid spying through curtains. Mark held my stare another second, then stepped back. "You're a disappointment," he said. "Get in line," I answered. He walked off, shaking his head like he'd been wronged. They drove away, Blake craning his neck to get a last look at the truck. I pocketed the keys and went inside. 3 days later, I was doing a routine check on the Silverado. Nothing unusual, just habit. When I crouched under the front end, I noticed something out of place. The wheel speed sensor lead in the front harness had been cut clean. Not frayed, not worn. Someone knew exactly what to slice to strand me later. It wouldn't have killed the truck instantly, but it would have stranded me somewhere inconvenient. Maybe the highway. Maybe a job site hours from town. Definitely not an accident. I didn't swear. I didn't rant. I just took out my phone and took pictures from every angle. Then I pulled the footage from the cameras I'd installed before, replaying the last few nights frame by frame. Blake never appeared on camera. Neither did my parents. Whoever did it came up the narrow side yard path along the fence, the one angle my first setup did not cover. I had the front walk and the alley approach, but not that cut through by the trash cans. So, I fixed that. I spent the evening redoing the entire setup. New mounts, higher angles, additional coverage over the whole driveway and both sides of the duplex. No gaps, no blind corners, no way to approach the truck without showing up on a lens. When I was done, I wiped my hands, locked the doors, and sat on the couch. I was waiting because the pattern was obvious. When Blake didn't get what he wanted, he escalated. When my parents didn't get what they wanted, they pushed harder, and nothing about the last week suggested they were done. The morning it happened, the air was cold enough to fog my breath as soon as I stepped outside. I locked the front door. Coffee in one hand, work bag in the other. Same routine, same time, same quiet duplex driveway. Then I saw the Silverado. All 4 tires were flattened to the rims. Not deflated, slashed, straight, deliberate cuts. Whoever did it used a sharp blade and confidence. I didn't walk closer right away. I stood still, taking in the angles of the cuts, the way the rubber peeled outward. No guessing needed. This wasn't random vandalism. It was a message. I turned around, went back inside, set the coffee down, and pulled up the upgraded camera feed. I fast-forwarded through the night until motion detection kicked in. There he was, Blake. Clear as daylight, hood off, face uncovered. He came in from the side yard path I had just covered, stepped into the driveway with a knife in his right hand, crouched, and slashed the front tire in one quick motion. No hesitation. Then the next, then the next. He switched hands once, wiped the blade on his sleeve, and kept going. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't even checking the surroundings. He did it like he believed the world was his, and I was still in the role they raised me for. He finished, looked at the truck like he'd accomplished something meaningful, and walked away without looking back. I saved the footage, then I saved it again to an external drive, then emailed a copy to myself. 3 versions, no chance of accidental deletion. I grabbed my keys for the Beta sedan, backed out, and drove straight to the police station. Inside, I explained the situation to the desk officer. He asked for proof. I handed him the USB. He clicked play. Blake appeared on the screen, slashing tire after tire with the enthusiasm of someone cutting birthday cake. The officer's eyebrows went up. "Well, that's clear. Crystal," I said. He called another officer over who watched it once and nodded. "Yeah, we'll open a case. Someone will reach out soon." The report was filed under vandalism and criminal mischief. I signed the papers, provided my contact information, and walked out. No emotion, no drama, just procedure. By the time I got home, Mark and Lisa's car was already parked crooked in the driveway, like they'd rushed over the second Blake realized the police had been notified. They were standing on my porch when I walked up. Lisa started first, voice overly bright. "Tyler, honey, we heard something happened. We came to help." Mark nodded, trying a calm expression he didn't own. "We want to make this right. Tires aren't cheap. Let us cover it." I walked past them and unlocked the door. Lisa stepped toward me. "We can fix this as a family," Mark added. "And Blake can take the truck on weekends just until he gets settled. That way, everyone wins." There it was. The trade, the strings attached, the fake peace offering. That was really just another attempt to get what they'd wanted from the beginning. I turned to face them. "You're not buying weekends with my property. That game is dead." Lisa's smile cracked instantly. Mark's face tightened. Before either of them could respond, Blake came around the corner of the house. He must have been listening the whole time. His expression flipped between shock and fury, realizing the plan had failed and I wasn't bending. "You called the cops on me," he snapped. "You slashed my tires," I said. "What did you think was going to happen?" He stepped forward, hands shaking. "You're seriously doing this over a truck? Over my property being vandalized by a grown man who should know better." Lisa rushed to Blake's side like he'd been stabbed. His upset. He wasn't thinking clearly. Mark jabbed a finger toward me. "This doesn't have to go further. Withdraw the report. We'll handle it in the family." "It's already filed," I said. "And it's staying filed." Blake's jaw tightened. His eyes went sharp. The victim act collapsing. "You're ruining my life." "No," I said, "you're ruining your own." He glared at me with a mix of humiliation and something close to panic. He wasn't used to consequences approaching from the front door. They didn't say goodbye when they left. They just got in the car, slammed the doors, and peeled out like teenagers caught shoplifting. An hour later, the call started. Blake first crying, rambling, begging, then yelling, insulting, threatening, then crying again. I didn't answer a single one. I let the voicemail fill up. When the last call came in, I picked up just long enough to deliver one line. "You wanted my attention. Congratulations. You got the kind that comes with a case number." Then I hung up. On the drive back from the station, I called the shop that outfits our site trucks. They had a matching set in stock and held them for me. I swung by in the beater, loaded the rubber, and headed home. By evening, I had the tires replaced one by one with a torque wrench and a quiet mind. After that, I went inside and upgraded the cameras again. 2 more angles, tighter coverage, infrared, automatic backups to cloud and external. When the system rebooted, I scrolled through the settings, checked every feed, and clicked save. Then I blocked all 3 numbers, Mark, Lisa, and Blake. Calls, texts, everything. Gone. The next morning, I took the paperwork and filed for a no-contact order. Clean, simple, legal, final. By the time I returned home and stepped out into the driveway, the air was quiet. The Silverado sat on new tires, cameras pointed from every angle, the morning damage replaced with clarity. I stood there for a moment, not to admire anything, but to acknowledge something simple. They didn't lose a truck fight. They lost the right to reach into my life ever again. And this time, they understood it. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.